What would you do if the person who once shattered your heart came knocking against when you'd finally learned to love someone else? Rain dripped from the edges of the slate roof, tracing slow rivers down the window pane. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet for a place that had once echoed with laughter and piano music. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. Outside, the world was dissolving into gray. He hadn't expected her to come back, not after 3 years, not after what she'd done. It had been a lifetime since Amelia left. And yet, the moment he saw her standing at the iron gate, clutching a trembling umbrella and calling his name through the storm, time folded in on itself. The same soft voice, the same desperate eyes, only this time, Daniel didn't move. He just watched her through the glass, heart pounding, until the housekeeper's footsteps entered the room behind him. "Sir," Clara said softly, noticing the figure outside. "Do you want me to tell her to leave?" Her voice steadied him somehow. She had that way about her, quiet, grounded, unshaken, even when the world spun. Daniel looked up at her, and for the first time in years, he realized something. He didn't need Amelia anymore, not in the way he once had. But that realization came too late. Because Amelia wasn't just back to say sorry. She had returned with a secret, and it would tear open everything Daniel thought he had rebuilt. The house on the hill had once been a family estate, but now it felt more like a sanctuary built from silence. Daniel had bought it after the accident, seeking solitude, convincing himself he was meant to be alone. The rooms were large and cold, but Clara filled them with life in small, almost invisible ways. Fresh bread every morning, a vase of wildflowers on the window ledge. She spoke little, worked quietly, and never asked questions about the photographs Daniel kept face down in his study. She arrived 2 years ago, answering an ad he barely remembered posting. She was in her late 20s, modest, deliberate, her presence almost spectral at first. But over time, Daniel found himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. The faint hum of her humming while she swept, the gentle knock before she entered a room. He didn't realize how much those sounds had become the rhythm of his days until the night Amelia returned. When Clara told him there was a woman at the gate, Daniel stood slowly, every nerve tightening. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against the stone path. He stepped outside, the cold slicing through his shirt. Amelia turned, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "Daniel," she whispered. "I had nowhere else to go." He didn't answer. Not at first. The sight of her drenched, desperate, her once perfect composure shattered was almost unreal. The last time he saw her, she was walking away down a sunlit street in Paris, her hand entwined with another man's. That memory still lived behind his eyelids. "I just need somewhere to stay," she said. "Just for a few days." Daniel hesitated, and then, against everything his pride screamed, he stepped aside. When she entered, the air inside the house seemed to shift. Even Clara noticed it. Amelia's presence was heavy, like perfume left too long in a closed room. She looked around as though she remembered every corner, the faded portrait in the hallway, the piano she used to play. Her gaze lingered on Daniel, but when it slid toward Clara, something sharp flickered in her expression. "Who's she?" Amelia asked. Daniel opened his mouth, but Clara answered first. "The housekeeper, ma'am." Amelia smiled faintly. "Housekeeper, right." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the storm outside, and to the quiet sounds of the house, breathing the ticking clock, the faint creak of floorboards. Somewhere below, he knew Clara was awake too. He'd seen the light under her door. She always stayed up late when something troubled him, though she never said so aloud. He thought about going downstairs, about talking to her just to hear her voice. But then, from the other room, came the sound of another door creaking open. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Amelia sat at the table, her hair damp, wrapped in one of Clara's old sweaters. She smiled when she saw Daniel. "I made coffee," she said, as though they were back to the way things once were. But Clara's hands shook slightly as she placed a plate on the counter. "I'll finish the linens upstairs," she murmured and slipped away. Days passed. Amelia's presence turned from intrusion to routine. She stayed longer than she promised. She laughed, filled the air with words Daniel had forgotten how to answer. Sometimes, when he looked at her, he remembered what it had felt like to be in love with her. The rush, the light, the way the world seemed larger beside her. But then he'd see Clara in the corner of his vision, folding napkins or lighting candles, and that illusion dissolved. There was something honest about Clara's silence, something grounding. When she smiled, it wasn't a performance, it was a quiet acknowledgement that life, no matter how broken, still went on. One evening, Daniel found Clara in the garden, her apron dusted with earth. The sunset stretched long across the fields, painting her hair in shades of amber. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain why Amelia had returned, why he'd let her stay, why his heart felt like it was being torn in two. But instead, he said softly, "I never asked why did you come here, Clara, to this place." She looked up, thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, "people go where they think no one will find them, but sometimes they're found anyway." Before he could ask what she meant, Amelia's voice rang out from the veranda. "Daniel, can you help me with something?" And just like that, the moment vanished. That night, Daniel woke to the faint sound of the piano. The notes were hesitant, uneven, someone playing a song they'd half forgotten. He walked quietly toward the music room and froze in the doorway. Clara sat at the piano, her fingers gliding gently across the keys. Moonlight fell across her face, and for a moment she looked almost ethereal, like someone who belonged to another world entirely. She stopped when she saw him, startled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone could hear." Daniel stepped closer. "You play beautifully." Her eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or memory. He wanted to ask more, but then Amelia's voice called from upstairs, sharp and insistent. The sound shattered the stillness, and Clara quickly stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Good night, Mr. Hale," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, Clara was gone. Her room was tidy, the bed made, her belongings packed neatly in a small suitcase that wasn't there the day before. On the kitchen counter lay a note, written in her careful slanted handwriting. "Thank you for everything. Some houses are meant to heal people. I think yours has done its part." Daniel stared at the note for a long time. Then he turned to Amelia, who stood in the doorway watching him. She left. She asked, he didn't answer. Amelia crossed her arms. "Maybe it's for the best." She seemed attached. Something cold twisted in his chest. Attached. That word felt wrong, too small for what Clara had become to him. She wasn't a servant or a guest or some fragile thing passing through his life. She was the pulse of the house, the quiet that made the silence bearable. And now she was gone. Amelia reached out, touching his arm. "We can start over, Daniel. We can make this work again." He turned to her slowly. "Why did you come back?" She hesitated. "Because, I thought I was pregnant." He froze. "Back then," she continued quickly, "before I left I thought it was yours. But when I found out it wasn't, when I found out it was his, I couldn't face you. I thought I could live with that lie. But now he's gone, and I keep wondering if I made a mistake." Daniel's jaw clenched. "And you came back because you're lonely." Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The rain began again outside, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the glass. Daniel looked past her, toward the garden where the earth still bore the imprint of Clara's footprints. He remembered her words, "Sometimes people go where they think no one will find them," and he realized she hadn't just meant herself. Without another word, he grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Amelia called after him, but Daniel didn't answer. He stepped into the storm, the wind slicing against his face, and followed the narrow path that led down the hill toward the small village beyond the fields, where the light still glowed faintly in the distance. Each step echoed with something he hadn't felt in years: clarity, purpose, the weight of a choice that could no longer be postponed. He didn't know what he would say when he found her. He only knew he had to try. Behind him, the house loomed dark and silent once more, and in the upstairs window, Amelia watched him vanish into the rain. Her expression shifted, first sorrow, then something else, something calculating. She turned back toward the piano, where a folded envelope lay waiting, sealed in wax. It wasn't addressed to Daniel. It was addressed to Clara, and it had been left there long before Amelia ever returned. The candle flickered once, then went out. The rain had thinned to a cold mist by the time Daniel reached the edge of the village. His breath came in ragged clouds as he passed shuttered windows and dim street lamps flickering through the fog. Every step carried the echo of her absence, Clara's absence, and a faint, irrational fear that he was already too late. He remembered the way she used to walk into the kitchen just before dawn, hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, humming that same unfinished melody. He remembered the way she'd pause before speaking, as if weighing the world in her mind before offering a single word. He'd taken that steadiness for granted, mistaking it for simplicity when, in truth, she'd been holding the pieces of him together all along. Now, he wasn't sure where to find her. A warm light glowed faintly through the fog. A small cafe, still open. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly. A few villagers looked up, their faces pale in the yellow light. Behind the counter, a woman drying mugs gave him a curious glance. "Evening," she said. "You look half drowned." "I'm looking for someone," he replied, breath still uneven. "The woman Clara. She worked for me. She might have come through here tonight." The woman frowned slightly. "Clara," she repeated. "Quiet girl, brown hair, polite. Left a few minutes ago." She took the road toward the old station. Daniel thanked her and turned back into the rain. The road to the station wound through the valley, where mist clung to the earth like smoke. He could hear the distant rumble of a passing freight train, the sound hauntingly familiar, reminding him of the day he'd left the city for good. When he reached the station, the platform was empty. The only light came from a flickering lamppost, and beneath it sat a single suitcase, Clara's suitcase. He stepped closer, his pulse quickening. The tag was torn, but the faint imprint of her initials was still visible. He looked around, no sign of her, only the rhythmic drip of water from the station roof, the wind tugging at the edges of the ticket booth. Then, a voice from behind him. "She's not gone yet." An older man in a tattered coat stepped out of the shadows, lighting a cigarette. "Miss Clara bought a ticket but never boarded. Sat there for a while, said she changed her mind. Left about 10 minutes ago. Took the path by the river." Daniel nodded, murmured thanks. and started toward the river trail. The path was narrow, overgrown with reeds. The river moved silently beside him, black and glassy under the pale moon. Then, through the fog, he saw her. She stood on the wooden bridge, her suitcase beside her, looking down at the water. For a moment, he just watched her, the way her hair moved with the wind, the faint tremor in her shoulders. Then he called softly, "Clara." She turned, startled, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Hale," he stepped closer. "You were just going to leave without saying goodbye." Her gaze faltered. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" "For you," she said quietly. She came back. "You don't need me anymore." He shook his head. "You think that's why I came here, to tell you I don't need you?" Clara's hands tightened around the wooden railing. "Then why are you here?" "Because the house feels empty without you. Because every room is colder. Because you," his voice caught. "You were the only one who stayed when everything else left." For a long moment, neither spoke. The river whispered below them, carrying fragments of rain and fallen leaves. Finally, Clara said, "She loves you. I can see it." "She loved the man I used to be," Daniel said. "Not the one I became after she broke me." Clara looked away, her reflection trembling in the water. "And what kind of man are you now?" "One who finally knows who matters." The wind shifted. For a second, he thought she might turn to him, might let the weight between them dissolve into something real. But then her expression changed. Something shadowed flickered behind her eyes. "Daniel," she whispered. "Before I left, I found something." "In the music room," he frowned. "What do you mean?" "There was an envelope with my name on it." He stared at her. "I didn't write it." "I know." She hesitated, her voice trembling now. It was Amelia's handwriting. A chill spread through him. "What did it say?" Clara reached into her coat pocket and drew out a small, damp envelope, sealed in red wax. "I haven't opened it," she said. "I didn't want to." Daniel took it, the paper soft with moisture. The wax bore the faint impression of a pressed flower, a detail only Amelia would choose. He turned it over in his hands, a sense of unease settling over him like fog. "Let's open it together," he said quietly. They stepped beneath the awning of the old station, sheltering from the mist. Daniel broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and began to read. "Clara, if you're reading this, then you've already seen me. You've already been in the house long enough to know things Daniel doesn't. He thinks he hired you. He thinks you answered an ad. But the truth is, you didn't. You were chosen." Daniel's throat went dry. Clara's voice was barely audible. "Keep reading. There's something I never told him. The night before I left him in Paris, I wasn't just running from guilt. I was running from a truth that could have destroyed him. The man I left him for, he wasn't who he said he was. He was my father's associate, a man who had been investigating Daniel's family for years. Daniel's fortune wasn't inherited. It was stolen. His father took money that wasn't his money, that belonged to my family." Daniel's hands trembled as the words blurred in the dim light. "When I found out, I wanted to tell him. But by then it was too late. My father was gone. The man I thought I loved had used me to reach Daniel, and before I could make things right, I disappeared. I knew Daniel would never trust me again, so I found someone else. Someone who could watch him. Someone who could protect him from what was coming." Clara's lips parted, a faint gasp escaping. "That someone was you, Clara. I asked you to look after him, to make sure he was safe. You promised me you wouldn't tell him." The rest of the letter was a blur of smeared ink and unfinished sentences. Daniel lowered the paper, his mind spinning. The rain intensified again, hammering against the station roof. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Clara's eyes glistened. "Yes, you knew all along. I didn't want to lie," she whispered. "But you were broken, Daniel. You didn't need more pain. You needed peace." He stepped back, the betrayal cutting deeper than he expected. "So everything, every word, every moment was just a task?" "No," she said fiercely, tears streaking down her cheeks. "It stopped being that a long time ago." He stared at her, the truth unraveling everything he thought he knew. The house, the silence, the slow healing, it had all been built on a lie. Clara stepped closer, trembling. "You have to understand. Amelia asked me to protect you because she knew someone else would come. Someone who wanted what was left of your family's estate. I didn't tell you because I thought it was over. I thought she was gone for good." Daniel exhaled slowly. "But now she's back." Clara nodded. "Then she's not alone." Thunder rolled across the hills, a low growl that seemed to shake the earth. From the distance came the faint echo of an engine, then headlights slicing through the mist, crawling up the winding road toward the station. Clara's eyes widened. "We have to go." They ran, through the wet grass, along the riverside path, breathless and soaked. The headlights grew closer behind them, weaving through the darkness like a hunter's gaze. Daniel's mind raced. If what the letter said was true, Amelia hadn't just returned out of guilt. She'd returned because the past she'd tried to bury was catching up to them all. They reached an old mill at the edge of the woods. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of rust. Clara leaned against the wall, clutching her chest. "He'll find us," she said. "Who?" "The man who followed her back. The one who took everything from your father. She said he'd come looking for you if the estate ever resurfaced. I didn't believe her until tonight." Daniel looked out the cracked window. The headlights had stopped near the station. A figure stepped out tall, deliberate, carrying an umbrella despite the wind. He couldn't see the man's face, but something about the way he moved was unnervingly familiar. "Clara," he said quietly, "what else aren't you telling me?" She hesitated. "He knows about me, about you." Amelia told him everything before she left years ago, but when she realized what he was planning, she tried to stop him. That's why she ran. Daniel stared into the darkness outside. The figure had begun walking toward the mill, slow and steady, like someone certain of their destination. "I thought this was over," Clara whispered, "but it's just beginning." Daniel turned to her, his voice low but resolute. "Then we face it together." For a moment she looked at him as if weighing the truth in his eyes, then she nodded. The footsteps outside drew nearer, the soft crunch of gravel, the click of polished shoes. The door creaked under the weight of the wind, and then a familiar voice spoke from the other side. "Daniel, Clara, we need to talk." "Amelia." Daniel froze. Clara's breath hitched. The door opened, and there she stood, drenched and trembling, but her eyes sharp with something fierce. "You have to listen," she said. "He's coming, and he's not after the money anymore." Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Then what does he want?" Amelia's eyes flicked toward Clara, filled with something that looked almost like guilt. "He wants her." The silence that followed felt like the air itself had stopped breathing. Outside, the headlights went dark. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of footsteps began again, slow, deliberate, closing in. And in that instant, Daniel understood. The housekeeper he'd fallen in love with wasn't just the keeper of his home. She was the key to the secret Amelia had tried so hard to bury. The first drop of rain fell through the broken roof, landing between them with a quiet echo. And then, the lights outside went out completely. The darkness swallowed everything. For a few long, suffocating seconds, there was nothing but the sound of breathing, the kind that trembles on the edge of panic. The faint echo of rain on the roof had vanished, replaced by the low hum of something unseen. Daniel's hand found Clara's in the dark. Her fingers were cold, tense, yet steady. Then came a flicker, a single flash of light from outside, bouncing off the shattered glass of the mill window. A car door slammed. Footsteps approached. Amelia turned toward the sound, her face pale and drawn, the moonlight etching sharp shadows across her features. "It's him," she whispered. The way she said it, him, sent a chill through Daniel's spine. She didn't mean it as a threat. She meant it as a confession. The door creaked, wind pushing it open an inch at a time. A figure stepped inside, the silhouette tall, composed, wrapped in a black overcoat slick with rain. His face was half hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but his voice, smooth, low, deliberate, filled the space. "So this is where you've been hiding." The sound of that voice rooted Daniel to the spot. He knew it. Somewhere deep inside he recognized it, but from where? The man stepped forward, removing his hat. The light from the dying lantern outside caught his face, a face Daniel hadn't seen since he was a boy. It was his father. For a moment, the world tilted. Clara's breath caught beside him. Amelia stared as if she'd seen a ghost. Daniel's voice broke through the silence, rough and uncertain. "You're dead." His father smiled faintly. "So I was told." The rain beat harder against the roof now, drumming like an unspoken warning. "I watched them bury you," Daniel said. "I saw the coffin lowered into the ground. Then you saw what I wanted you to see." His father replied, a neat ending to a messy story. Daniel took a step forward. "Why?" His father's eyes shifted toward Amelia, then to Clara. "Because there are some truths that can't survive daylight. Not then, not now." Amelia's voice trembled. "You used me. I saved you," he said flatly. "The moment you realized what the Hale fortune was built on, you became a liability. You and your lover. I kept you alive." Clara's voice broke the tension, quiet but piercing. "And me." His gaze landed on her, softening for the first time. "You were the only innocent one. You were never meant to be involved." Clara shook her head. Amelia said, "You were the one investigating him." A faint, almost amused expression crossed his face. "Investigating?" "No, reclaiming. Everything." Daniel inherited the land, the estate, the company belonged to my partner once. A man I trusted, Amelia's father. The pieces shifted painfully into place. Amelia turned away, eyes wide with disbelief. "You told me he ruined you. You said my father stole everything from you." "And he did," his father said, voice steady as stone. "He stole my name, my work, and then he took his own life, leaving the debt on my shoulders. I had two choices, die with him or build something out of the ruins. I chose the latter. You call it theft. I call it survival." The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel could feel his pulse in his throat, a mix of rage and confusion tangling his thoughts. "So you faked your death," he said. "You let me believe I was alone. You let me grieve you." His father's expression was unreadable. "Would you have become who you are if I hadn't?" Daniel wanted to shout, to strike him, to demand answers that wouldn't come. But something in the old man's eyes stopped him. Behind the cold logic was something fragile, something human, regret, maybe, or exhaustion. Amelia stepped forward, voice trembling. "Why are you here now?" He sighed, setting his hat down on a wooden beam. "Because the people I ran from have found me again, and they know about all of you. The money, the estate, the secrets. They'll come for everything unless we end it tonight. Who? Clara asked. The same people who took your parents, he said quietly. The ones who destroyed the first Hale fortune before I ever rebuilt it. The words hit Daniel like ice. My mother's accident. His father didn't answer. Daniel's voice rose. Tell me the truth. The old man's eyes lifted, haunted. It wasn't an accident. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Lightning flared through the window, illuminating their faces, Amelia pale with guilt, Clara frozen in shock, Daniel caught between fury and disbelief. She was going to expose them. His father continued. Your mother found out what we were doing. She wanted to go to the police. They silenced her before she could. Daniel stumbled back a step, the floorboards groaning under his weight. And you let them? I tried to save her, he whispered, but by the time I arrived it was already done. That's when I decided to disappear, to make it look like I died. Every memory Daniel had of his childhood, the arguments, the sudden moves, the way his father avoided questions suddenly burned in new light. The truth he'd spent his life avoiding was now staring him in the face, unflinching. He turned away, breath shallow. So all of this, everything was built on lies. His father nodded slowly. But it doesn't have to end that way. Outside, a car door slammed again, then another. Headlights flared through the mist, more than one pair this time. Clara stepped closer to the window, her voice sharp with fear. They're here. His father's composure didn't break. You need to leave. There's a path behind the mill that leads to the quarry. Take it and keep going until you reach the woods. Daniel shook his head. I'm not leaving you. Don't make the same mistake I did, his father said, eyes fierce. You can still save her. He looked at Clara when he said it, and for a moment, Daniel saw something, recognition maybe. Not just the acknowledgement of a stranger, but something deeper. Wait, Daniel said. You said you knew her parents. His father didn't answer. Answer me. He hesitated, then nodded once. Her mother worked for me once, years ago. Before all this began. Amelia's voice broke through, cold and trembling. You don't mean yes, he said. Clara isn't just a bystander. She's the daughter of the woman who died because of what we built. Clara froze. Her eyes widened, her hand slipping from Daniel's grasp as if the ground had vanished beneath her. That's not true, she whispered. My mother, she died in a fire. His father's gaze darkened. A fire. We started to erase the evidence. She wasn't supposed to be there. The words landed like a blow. Clara stepped back, shaking her head, her face pale as the moonlight spilling through the broken window. Daniel reached for her, but she turned away. You knew, she said, voice breaking. All this time, you knew who I was, and you let me. Her voice cracked, and she couldn't finish. I didn't know, Daniel said quickly. I swear, Clara, I didn't. But she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the door, on the faint shadows moving outside. His father reached into his coat, pulling out a small metal case. Inside lay a folded map, an old photograph, and a key. Take it, he said. Everything you need to know is in there. Where the money came from, who killed your mother, why they'll never stop until you're gone. Daniel hesitated, then took the case. His father gave him a final look, half warning, half farewell. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be when this ends. The one who keeps running, or the one who tells the truth. Before Daniel could reply, glass shattered. A bullet ripped through the side window, embedding itself in the beam beside them. Go, his father shouted. Daniel grabbed Clara's hand. Amelia followed as they ran through the back door, the storm breaking open above them. Behind them came the sound of more shots, echoing through the valley. They sprinted through the trees, branches tearing at their clothes, the mud slick underfoot. The old quarry loomed ahead, its cliffs veiled in mist. The path split into one leading toward the forest, the other down into the stone hollow. This way, Clara called, leading toward the quarry's edge. They slid down a narrow path hidden beneath the roots of an ancient oak. From below, the quarry looked like a forgotten world, a wide crater filled with rainwater and shadow. Daniel's lungs burned, his thoughts spinning. His father was alive. Clara was tied to his mother's death. Amelia's return wasn't redemption, it was warning. And now, everything he believed about love, loyalty and loss had been turned inside out. They stopped beneath an overhang, gasping for breath. Thunder rolled again, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Clara turned toward him, tears mingling with the rain. You should hate me. I don't, he said softly. Not for something that wasn't your fault, but my being there, my presence was all because of her, she said, glancing toward Amelia. Everything I felt, everything I thought was real. It started as a lie. Daniel shook his head. No, it became real. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about her, or my father, or the past. It became about us. A gunshot cracked the air. The sound echoed across the quarry, sharp and final. Clara flinched, her eyes darting toward the ridge above. A silhouette stood there for an instant before vanishing into the dark. Then came another sound, closer, heavier, a body collapsing onto wet ground. Daniel turned just in time to see Amelia fall to her knees, clutching her side. Blood spread across her coat, dark and glistening. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. I tried, to stop him, Daniel demanded, but she didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward Clara, filled with something that looked almost like forgiveness. I'm sorry, she whispered, for all of it. Her eyes closed, her hand falling limp against the stone. The rain came harder now, pounding against the earth, washing away the trail of blood. Daniel knelt beside her, but she was already gone. Behind him, Clara whispered, "He's still out there." Daniel stood slowly, the metal case still clutched in his hand. The wind howled through the quarry, carrying the scent of smoke from the direction of the mill. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. He looked at Clara, at the fear and sorrow in her eyes, and felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet, irreversible understanding. The story he'd been living wasn't about loss anymore. It was about inheritance. Not the kind written in wills or locked away in safes, but the kind passed down in secrets, in guilt, in the choices that echo through generations. And for the first time, Daniel realized that truth wasn't something to find, it was something to face. The wind changed direction. The sirens grew louder, and from the edge of the forest came a voice calling his name, low, familiar, and full of something that didn't sound entirely human. Daniel turned toward it, heart pounding, as the darkness seemed to move closer. "Daniel," the voice said again, clearer now. And he knew whoever was coming out of that forest wasn't a stranger. It was someone who should have been gone long ago. The voice drifted through the mist like a memory refusing to die. It carried no anger, no urgency, only the quiet weight of recognition. Daniel froze, the sound slicing through the rain as if the storm itself had paused to listen. "Daniel," it came again, softer this time, from somewhere between the trees. Clara's hand found his arm. "Who is that?" she whispered. He couldn't answer. The voice was too familiar, too impossible. He'd heard it in echoes of old dreams, in the faint hum of his childhood nightmares. It was the same voice that used to read him to sleep, the same that vanished the night his mother died. He stepped toward the sound, the mud pulling at his boots. "Stay here," he murmured. "Daniel," but he was already moving, drawn by something he couldn't resist. The forest ahead was a labyrinth of wet leaves and whispering branches, each step leading him deeper into the dark. The sirens in the distance faded until only the river's murmur and his own heartbeat remained. When he reached the clearing, the mist parted, and there she was, his mother. She stood beneath a canopy of rain, wrapped in a gray coat, her hair streaked with silver, her face pale but alive. Her eyes, those unmistakable, steady eyes, met his with an expression he couldn't read. Daniel's breath caught. "This isn't real," he whispered. But she stepped closer, the water rippling around her boots. "It's as real as you need it to be." The world seemed to tilt, suspended in a fragile balance between dream and memory. "You're dead," he said, the words trembling. "I was," she said simply. "But death has a strange way of choosing its timing." He stared, struggling to breathe. "How I saw you saw what you were meant to see," she said gently. "Your father wanted you to believe it. He needed to disappear, and I let him. It was the only way to keep you safe." The wind lifted, scattering droplets of rain across her face. She looked older than he remembered, but not weaker. There was still steel in her gaze, the quiet defiance of a woman who had carried truth like a blade she dared not unsheath. Daniel shook his head, his voice barely holding together. "You let me believe you were gone, all these years. Why? Because you were never meant to inherit any of it," she said. "The house, the company, the fortune, it was all bloodstained. We thought if we vanished, the cycle would end. But it didn't. Your father couldn't let it go, and neither could they." He stepped closer. "Who are they?" Her eyes flicked toward the forest's edge, where shadows seemed to move in rhythm with the wind. "The ones who made us what we are. The ones who profited from every lie. They never stopped watching. Daniel, not even when you thought you were free." The branches behind him rustled. Clara emerged slowly from the mist, her eyes wide, her breath uneven. When she saw the woman standing there, she froze. "Daniel," she whispered. "Who?" "My mother," he said softly. Clara stared, disbelief etched across her face. "But I know." The woman's gaze turned toward Clara, sharp and assessing. "So you're the girl." Clara hesitated. "I don't know what that means." "It means," Daniel's mother said, stepping forward, "that you were never supposed to meet him. You were supposed to disappear before any of this began. But Amelia changed everything when she brought you into that house." Clara's voice shook. "Why? What did she want from me?" Daniel's mother paused, her expression unreadable. Not what she wanted, what she feared. "You're the last piece of something she couldn't destroy." A low rumble echoed through the woods, the sound of engines, more than one. Headlights cut through the fog, crawling toward the clearing. "They've found us," Daniel said. His mother nodded once. "Then there's no more time for hiding." The roar grew louder. Black vehicles emerged from the tree line, tires grinding through the mud. Men in dark coats stepped out, their faces shadowed beneath hoods. Clara backed away instinctively, but Daniel's mother raised a hand. "Don't run. They'll shoot if you run." The men approached slowly, methodically. One of them carried a flashlight. The beam found their faces, lingering on Daniel before moving to his mother. A voice called out, "Eleanor Hale," her name cut through the rain like a verdict. The man who spoke stepped forward, his movements confident, almost familiar. When he removed his hood, Daniel felt a chill ripple through him. It was the lawyer who had handled his father's estate, the same man who had delivered the papers after the funeral. Mr. Ashford, his mother said. Still working for ghosts, I see. Ashford smiled faintly. Ghosts tend to pay well. Daniel stepped protectively in front of Clara. What do you want? Ashford's gaze shifted to the case in Daniel's hand. What's inside that box? You have no idea what you're holding. Daniel tightened his grip. Then maybe you should tell me. Ashford took another step forward. Inside that case is the ledger your father kept. Every transaction, every transfer, every name involved in building the Hale Empire. It's not just money, Daniel. It's leverage, enough to destroy people who have ruled from the shadows for decades. Clara looked at Daniel, her voice barely a whisper. Then that's why they killed your mother. Eleanor shook her head. No, they tried, but they needed me alive long enough to sign the rights away. They thought I'd break. I didn't. Ashford's tone hardened. Give me the case, and no one gets hurt. The forest seemed to close in. Daniel could feel the pulse of Clara's fear beside him, the quiet strength beneath it. The rain turned heavier, drumming like the heartbeat of the earth itself. No, Daniel said. Not until I know everything. Ashford's smile vanished. He nodded once to the men behind him. The sound of safeties being released echoed like thunder. Eleanor moved in front of her son. Daniel, listen to me, she said urgently. There's a cabin at the river's bend. Inside the floorboards there's another box one your father left for you. Take it and go. Everything else can burn. I'm not leaving you again, he said. You don't have a choice. Gunfire erupted before the sentence finished. The air exploded into chaos wood, splintering, bullets slicing through the rain. Daniel grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the trees, his mother's voice lost in the noise. They ran through the mud, the forest blurring into streaks of gray and green. Behind them, flashes of gunfire tore through the mist. Daniel's breath came in sharp bursts, the case still clutched against his chest. When they reached the river, the noise faded, just the rain and the rushing water, heavy and relentless. Clara stumbled to a stop, gasping. We can't keep running. Daniel turned, scanning the trees. We don't have to. The cabin's close. How do you know? He didn't, but something inside him, a memory, an instinct, pulled him upstream. They followed the curve of the river until the faint outline of a small structure emerged from the fog, half collapsed, but standing. The door hung from its hinges, the wood soft with rot. Inside it smelled of dust and river moss, the air heavy with disuse. Daniel knelt, prying up the loose floorboards. Beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was another box, smaller, older. He opened it. Inside lay a photograph of his parents, smiling in front of the house on the hill, a key identical to the one in the other case, and a single page, folded and sealed in wax. Clara crouched beside him, her voice trembling. What is it? He broke the seal and read aloud. If you're reading this, then the cycle hasn't ended. You're standing where I once stood, Daniel, between what was stolen and what was lost. If you choose revenge, you'll die as I did, surrounded by ghosts. But if you choose truth, you may yet free us all. The name you need isn't mine or Ashford's, it's the one beneath the chapel. The ink had bled, but the last line was clear. Find the ledger. Burn the house. Clara's eyes widened. He wants you to destroy everything. Daniel looked up, his breath steadying. Not everything. Just the lie that built it. A branch snapped outside. Both of them froze. Then came footsteps, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. Daniel's mother stepped into the doorway, soaked and trembling but alive. Her face was streaked with blood and rain. They're dead, she said hoarsely. Ashford and the others, but they weren't alone. There's someone else who, Clara asked. Eleanor looked at Daniel with something between grief and resignation. Someone who's been controlling this from the beginning, someone we both trusted. Lightning flashed through the cracked window, illuminating the edges of her face. Daniel swallowed hard. She hesitated, as if speaking the name itself might break what little remained of her strength. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Your brother. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible, suffocating. True. Daniel stared at her, unable to speak. I don't have a brother, he said finally. Her eyes met his, tired, sorrowful, unyielding. He did, and now he's coming for what's left. Outside, the wind roared through the trees, carrying with it the low, distant hum of a single engine approaching the river. Daniel turned toward the sound, his pulse quickening, every instinct screaming that the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning, and as the engine drew nearer, cutting through the fog like a blade, he realized what his father's words had truly meant. You can still save her. Because the past wasn't chasing him anymore. It was coming home. The engine's growl was the sound of inevitability. It tore through the fog, slow and deliberate, like a beast that already knew its prey had nowhere left to run. Daniel stood at the window, his pulse a dull roar in his ears, the rain streaking down the cracked glass like veins of light. His mother stood behind him, pale and shaking, her breath shallow. Clara hovered near the corner, torn between fear and disbelief. None of them spoke. The sound outside said everything. Headlights cut through the mist, two circles of white that stopped just short of the cabin. The engine died. Silence. Then the creak of a door opening, the thud of boots sinking into wet earth. A figure emerged from the haze. tall, measured, unhurried. When he stepped into view, Daniel felt the world tilt. It was like looking into a mirror cracked in half, the same jawline, the same eyes his father's eyes, dark and knowing, but colder, older, a version of himself sculpted by something merciless. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Caleb, the name hit the air like a confession. He walked closer, the rain hissing off his coat. Mother, she took a trembling step forward. We buried you. A faint smile touched his lips. You buried what you were told to. Daniel's throat tightened. You're my brother. Caleb's eyes flicked toward him. He looked him over as if studying a stranger who happened to share his face. But while you were playing the grieving son, I was rebuilding what our father destroyed. Eleanor's hand moved to her chest. You mean what he tried to protect you from? Caleb's gaze hardened. Protect. You call lies protection. You let me rot in that place while you built your new life. Do you have any idea what they did to me? His voice cracked on the last word. Clara stepped forward, cautious but firm. Then stop this. Whatever they did, you can still hear cut her off with a glare sharp enough to silence the air itself. You shouldn't be here. Daniel moved slightly, shielding her. She's the only one who shouldn't have to be. Caleb's eyes drifted to the case in Daniel's hand. So that's it, the ledger. The Empire's last heartbeat. He smirked faintly. You really don't know what's inside, do you? Daniel's grip tightened. I know it's enough to end all of this. Caleb took a step closer, his boots scraping against the cabin floorboards. End it. No, brother, it's enough to start again. That book isn't a confession, it's a blueprint. Every name, every account, every debt owed. It's the map of power itself. Eleanor's voice shook. Your father wanted it destroyed, and look where that got him, Caleb said. A grave with no stone. A son who doesn't even remember the truth. Daniel could feel the air between them tightening, like a wire pulled too far. Then tell me the truth. Caleb stared at him for a long moment. Then, softly, almost tenderly, he said, you were never supposed to inherit anything. Not the company, not the house, not even her love. His eyes flicked toward Clara, but you always had a way of taking what wasn't yours. Daniel's pulse thudded in his chest. This isn't about her. Oh, it's always about her, Caleb said, his tone sharp. The housekeeper's daughter. The one father kept in the shadows because she was never meant to exist. You don't even know who she is, do you? Clara's face went pale. What are you talking about? Caleb smiled faintly. Tell him, mother. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Caleb's voice dropped, colder now. Tell him what she was to father. Tell him why the housekeeper never left, why he built that room in the West Wing, the one you kept locked. The words struck like blows in the quiet cabin. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice breaking. Clara, your mother was more than our housekeeper. She was your father's wife before me. Clara's knees weakened. She steadied herself against the wall. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. That's not possible. Daniel turned to his mother, eyes wide. You knew. I didn't know until after, Eleanor said, tears catching in her throat. He told me she died. I thought it was grief that made him distant all those years. I didn't know she was alive, that she had you. Caleb's eyes flickered to Clara, half-sister, he said softly. The one the old man hid to keep the family line pure. But then you came along. Daniel, the perfect replacement, the golden son. And when he realized his secret was no longer safe, he buried it. Buried us. Daniel felt the world spin. You're lying. Caleb's expression darkened. Look at her and tell me you don't see him in her face. Daniel turned to Clara, his breath ragged. For the first time, he saw the resemblance, the eyes, the angle of her cheekbones, the faint dimple that had always felt inexplicably familiar. Clara shook her head, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. No, this isn't real. My mother worked for them, yes, but she raised me alone. She never, Caleb interrupted, because she thought he'd come back for her for you, but he never did. He replaced her. With them. With us. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rain hammered the roof, each drop a reminder of the impossible weight pressing down on them all. Eleanor whispered it wasn't supposed to be this way. Caleb's voice softened, almost wistful. But it is. And now you'll give me the ledger, or I'll make sure you all understand the cost of secrets. Daniel stared at him, his thoughts a blur of faces and echoes. The brother he never knew. The father he no longer trusted. The woman he loved, now turned into something forbidden. The ground beneath him no longer felt solid. It was history, lies, and grief masquerading as truth. Clara took a step forward, her voice trembling but clear. You can't keep repeating their mistakes. Caleb turned his gaze toward her. You think I have a choice? You think after what they did to me, I could just walk away? He took another step closer, his tone sharpening. You of all people should understand what it means to be erased. Daniel's body moved before his mind did. He stepped between them, the ledger held tight in his hand. You'll have to kill me first. Caleb's eyes narrowed, if that's what it takes. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, Caleb lunged. The struggle was fast, chaotic, a flash of movement. The sound of wood splintering, a cry that tore through the rain. The ledger flew from Daniel's grip, sliding across the floor. Clara dove for it, but Caleb caught her wrist, twisting hard enough to make her gasp. "Let her go," Daniel shouted. Caleb looked up, his expression unreadable. "She's never been yours to protect." Eleanor screamed, "Stop this." But it was too late. The gun appeared from Caleb's coat like an afterthought, its muzzle gleaming in the dim light. He pressed it against Clara's temple. "Give me the book or she dies." Daniel's mind fractured between reason and terror. "You don't have to do this. You're not him." Caleb's jaw clenched. "No, I'm what he made me." Daniel's mother moved slowly, quietly, her trembling hand reaching toward the edge of a fallen beam near the fireplace. Her eyes met Daniel's, pleading, resolute. Clara whispered, "Daniel, don't," and then, the sound, a single gunshot that tore the air in half. For a moment, no one moved. Caleb's body stiffened, eyes wide. The gun fell from his hand, hitting the floor with a hollow clatter. Eleanor stood behind him, the small revolver shaking in her grip, smoke curling from the barrel. Caleb turned slowly toward her, confusion softening the fury in his face. "Mother," tears streamed down her cheeks. "I lost you once. I won't let you destroy what's left." He tried to speak, but the blood came first dark and quiet, spreading across his shirt like an ink stain. He collapsed to his knees, eyes locked on Daniel's, as if searching for something he'd never find. "I just wanted to come home," he whispered. Then he fell. The rain outside softened to a hush. The storm at last began to fade. For a long moment, no one spoke. The world seemed to exhale. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him, the shock settling in his bones. Clara crouched beside him, her hand finding his. Eleanor stood motionless, the gun slipping from her fingers. The only sound was the river outside. Steady, eternal. Daniel looked at the ledger lying open beside them. The ink had bled, the pages half ruined, but the words were still visible: names, numbers, the architecture of betrayal. Everything their family had been built on. He closed the book. "It ends here." Eleanor's voice broke. "He was your brother." Daniel looked up at her. "And you're my mother. But none of that matters if we keep living in the ruins of what they made." He rose, carrying the ledger outside into the rain. The cabin's doorway glowed faintly in the moonlight, breaking through the clouds. Clara followed him silently, her eyes hollow but alive. He set the ledger on a patch of wet earth and struck a match. For a moment, the flame flickered uncertainly in the wind. Then it caught, the fire spread, the pages curling, the ink blistering, the names dissolving into ash. Behind him, Eleanor watched through tears, whispering something too soft for the wind to keep. The flames reflected in Daniel's eyes not as destruction, but as release. When the last of the book crumbled to dust, he turned to Clara. Her face was streaked with rain and grief, but there was something else, too, a strange, fragile calm. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the dark line of trees, where dawn was beginning to draw its first faint breath of light. "We go back," he said quietly. "Not to the house, to the truth." The river carried the ash downstream, disappearing into the fog, and as the fire dimmed to embers, Daniel felt, for the first time in years, that the storm was no longer behind him. It was clearing, but somewhere, beneath the earth where the old chapel stood, another secret waited, one the fire hadn't touched. And in that silence, as the last match went out, the faintest echo of Caleb's voice whispered through the wind. "You can burn the book, brother, but you can't burn the blood." The dawn arrived, not as light, but as forgiveness. It seeped through the clouds, pale and patient, touching the river first, the same river that had carried the ashes of their family's sins. The storm had passed, but its echoes clung to the earth, scorched wood, torn soil, footprints that led nowhere. Daniel stood where the cabin had been, a ghost of smoke still whispering from the blackened wood. The air smelled of rain and char, of endings and beginnings woven together so tightly that one could no longer be told apart from the other. Clara stood beside him, her coat pulled close, her hair damp and tangled. She hadn't spoken since the fire, neither had he. Words felt too small for what they'd buried and what they'd freed. His mother sat a few yards away on a fallen tree, her face turned toward the horizon where the first thin gold of sunlight bled through the gray. She looked older now, smaller somehow, as if the years she had stolen from grief had finally come to claim her. The silence was heavy but not cruel. It was the kind that held space for what couldn't be said. After a while, Clara moved toward the riverbank, crouching low. She scooped up a handful of wet earth, letting it run through her fingers. "It's strange," she murmured, not looking up. "How something so full of death can still smell like life." Daniel turned toward her. "Maybe it's the only way the earth knows how to forgive us." She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no accusation in her gaze, no lingering horror at what they'd learned about who they were. Only quiet understanding. Two people standing in the wreckage of truth, still breathing. The sound of the river filled the space between them, a steady rhythm, as if reminding them that movement was its own kind of healing. Eleanor rose slowly and walked to them. Her hands trembled as she brushed a strand of hair from Daniel's face, the gesture delicate, hesitant. "Your father thought blood was everything," she said softly. "He believed legacy was the same as love. But he was wrong." Daniel looked down, the wind tugging at his coat. "And what do you believe?" She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. that sometimes love has to destroy itself before it can begin again. She looked out toward the river. Your brother understood that in his own way. He just didn't know how to stop burning. The three of them stood there listening to the world return. Birds began to stir in the trees, their faint songs threading through the mist. The forest that had felt haunted now seemed simply tired, ready to rest. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the distant hill. Through the thinning fog, he could just make out the silhouette of the house, the Hale estate, its roofline jagged against the sky. It looked smaller now, emptied of the power it once held over him. He thought of all the years he'd spent within those walls, believing his life was something solid, something earned. But it had always been borrowed, a script written by others, filled with lies he didn't know he was repeating. Clara followed his gaze. Will you go back? He hesitated. Not to live? Then why? To say goodbye. She nodded, as if she understood something beyond the words. Then we should go together. Eleanor's voice was quiet behind them. I can't go with you. Daniel turned. Why not? Her eyes were full of sorrow, but her tone carried a peace he hadn't heard from her before. I have to face what's left behind. There are things that still need to be answered for. The company, the people we hurt, it doesn't just vanish because we burned a book. She placed a hand on his chest. But you don't belong to this anymore. Neither of you do. Clara's eyes glistened. What will you do? Eleanor smiled faintly. Tell the truth, for once. Whatever it costs. Daniel swallowed hard. You don't have to do it alone. I already have, she said. Then, after a pause, but now I want to. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he stepped forward and embraced her. She held him tightly, her hands trembling against his back. It wasn't a goodbye filled with tears or promises. It was quieter than that, two people acknowledging that love had survived even when everything else hadn't. When he finally stepped back, she nodded toward the path that wound toward the hill. Go, before you start to look back. He turned to Clara. She reached out, taking his hand without a word. Together they began walking. The path was muddy, broken by roots and stones, but it led them upward through the thinning trees. The sky brightened as they climbed, streaks of gold cutting through what remained of the fog. Neither spoke. The rhythm of their footsteps was enough. When they reached the crest of the hill, the house stood before them, silent, proud, and broken. Its windows were dark, its paint peeled, ivy crawling across its bones like veins reclaiming their host. The gates hung open, rusted from years of rain. Daniel stepped through first, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The door gave way easily, groaning in protest as it opened to the vast hollow of the main hall. Dust floated in the morning light. Furniture still stood where it had always been, untouched by time but emptied of life. The portraits on the walls watched them, faces of ancestors who had once believed the Hale name would last forever. He walked slowly through the space, his fingers brushing the banister, the marble, the familiar imperfections of a world he once thought was perfect. Every corner whispered something different. Laughter, secrets, the creak of his father's study door late at night. Clara followed in silence until they reached the west wing, the one that had always been locked. The door was already open now, its hinges rusted through. Inside was a small room, simple, a narrow bed, a cracked mirror, a window that looked out toward the river, and on the dresser an old photograph in a silver frame, a man and two women. The one in the center was Clara's mother. Clara stepped forward, lifting the frame with trembling hands. She was here, she whispered, all this time. Daniel watched her, unsure if there were any words that could fit the shape of that realization. After a long silence, Clara placed the photograph back where it had been. He kept her close. She said, maybe out of guilt, maybe love, maybe both. Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe love and guilt are the same thing sometimes. They stood there until the sun began to filter through the window, washing the room in gold. When they finally left the house, Daniel paused in the doorway, taking one last look inside. He didn't see ghosts anymore. He saw stories, and finished, imperfect, human. Outside, the world was wide and waiting. At the edge of the drive, he turned to Clara. What happens now? She smiled faintly, the first true smile he'd seen in days. We start small, a place by the river, maybe somewhere quiet. He returned the smile. You think peace is something you can find. I think it's something you make, she said. Every day, until it stays. They began walking down the hill, hand in hand, the morning light spilling over them. Behind them the house stood still, its secret spent, its purpose complete. The wind moved through the trees like an exhale. Halfway down the path, Daniel looked back one last time. The roof caught the sunlight, and for a moment, it almost looked like the house was breathing again, lighter, unburdened. He turned away, feeling the weight lift from his chest. The past would always live somewhere behind him, but it no longer owned him. As they reached the river, the sound of water filled the air, gentle and endless. Clara knelt by the bank, touching the surface lightly, watching the ripples spread. Daniel stood beside her, the reflection of the morning sky shimmering in his eyes. Do you think we ever really escape where we come from? She asked quietly. He thought for a moment, then said, maybe we don't escape it. Maybe we just learn how to walk beside it. She smiled, letting the water slip through her fingers. They watched as the current carried the last traces of ash downstream. fading into the distance until it was gone. The river kept moving. The forest breathed. The sun rose higher. Somewhere behind them, the house on the hill began to crumble gently into itself. Not with violence, but with grace, like a memory finally at rest. And as they walked toward the horizon, their shadows stretching long over the earth, Daniel felt the quiet hum of something he hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not relief, just peace. Because sometimes the heart doesn't belong to where it started, it belongs to where it finally learns to stay. The wind lifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and soil and something new. And as the screen of life began to fade to white, one last question lingered in the silence. When everything you've built on lies has turned to dust, what do you build next, when all that's left is truth?